Right now, in this exact moment, your nervous system is probably running at about 70% of its stress capacity, which means you're chronically operating in a state of low-level fight or flight that's destroying your health, your decision-making ability, your relationships, and your capacity to actually enjoy your life. And the devastating part is that you've been in this state for so long that it feels normal. You don't even realize how much mental and physical energy is being consumed by background stress until you experience what it's like to actually be calm. The ancient Stoics developed 5 specific meditation techniques that are radically different from modern mindfulness practices, and these techniques don't just help you relax temporarily. They fundamentally rewire how your brain processes stress so that situations that used to trigger anxiety and overwhelm literally stop registering as threats. And this isn't spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. This is sophisticated psychological training that Marcus Aurelius used to maintain complete mental clarity while dealing with plagues, wars, political betrayals, and a weight of ruling an empire where one bad decision could cost thousands of lives. Here's what makes Stoic meditation different from everything else you've tried. Instead of trying to empty your mind or achieve some blissed-out state, Stoic meditation involves active mental rehearsal, perspective shifting, and deliberate reframing that gives you practical tools for handling real-world stress in the moment it's happening. And by the end of this video, you're going to have 5 specific techniques that you can use immediately to reduce your stress levels by at least 50% within the next 7 days if you actually practice them. Now, before we dive into these 5 techniques that are going to transform your relationship with stress, I need to tell you about something that's going to make this entire process exponentially more powerful, and that's the subconscious millionaire system that I've linked in the description. Because here's the reality. Stress is not just caused by external circumstances. It's caused by the subconscious beliefs and programs you're running about what those circumstances mean about you and your safety and your future. And until you address those subconscious stress patterns at their root, you're going to keep generating stress even when your external life is objectively fine. That system gives you the exact framework for identifying and reprogramming the subconscious patterns that generate chronic stress. So instead of just managing stress symptoms, you're eliminating the internal causes that create stress in the first place. So check out that link after this video if you're serious about permanent transformation. But right now, let's talk about the first Stoic meditation technique that will immediately shift how you experience stressful situations. The first Stoic meditation technique is called the view from above. And this is one of the most powerful perspective-shifting practices ever developed because it instantly takes you out of the narrow, ego-centered view that makes everything feel like a personal crisis and gives you a cosmic perspective that reveals how small and temporary most of your stress actually is. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly in his meditations. He would imagine himself zooming out from his immediate situation, seeing himself in his palace, then seeing Rome from above, then seeing Italy, then the entire Mediterranean, then the whole Earth floating in space, then the solar system, then the galaxy, and from that vantage point, he could see that his personal stresses, as overwhelming as they felt in the moment, were tiny blips in the vast expanse of space and time, and that perspective shift didn't make his responsibilities less important. It just made the emotional charge around them decrease dramatically so he could think clearly and respond effectively instead of being paralyzed by stress. Here's how you practice this technique. When you notice stress building in your body, you stop whatever you're doing and you close your eyes, and you start by feeling yourself in your physical location right now. Then you imagine zooming out and seeing yourself from above like a camera pulling back. You see the room you're in, then the building, then your neighborhood, then your city, then your country, then the continent, then the whole planet. Then you keep going and see Earth as a pale blue dot in the solar system, and you recognize that on this tiny spinning rock, there are 8 billion people all dealing with their own struggles and stresses, and your particular stress in this moment is just one of trillions of stressful moments happening simultaneously across the planet, and none of them matter in the grand scheme of the universe. What happens neurologically through this practice is that you're activating different parts of your brain. You're moving from the amygdala, which is generating the stress response, to the prefrontal cortex, which can observe and contextualize, and that shift alone reduces the intensity of the stress because you're no longer identified with it. You're observing it from a distance. Epictetus taught a similar practice where he would remind his students that they're just tiny parts of a much larger whole, and that the problems that feel catastrophic to the ego are actually insignificant when seen from the perspective of the universe. And this isn't nihilism or saying your problems don't matter. It's recognizing that the emotional intensity you're bringing to the situation is disproportionate to its actual significance. And once you see that, you can respond to the situation more effectively because you're not drowning in unnecessary stress. The practical application is to practice this visualization for just 2 minutes every morning before you start your day. And what you'll notice is that situations that normally would have triggered significant stress start feeling more manageable because you've trained your brain to automatically contextualize them within a larger perspective. And this is one of the most effective stress reduction techniques ever developed because it works with your psychology rather than against it. You're not trying to suppress the stress. You're just showing your brain a different way of seeing the situation that naturally reduces the stress response. The second Stoic meditation technique is premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. And this is probably the most counterintuitive stress reduction practice because it involves deliberately imagining worst-case scenarios in vivid detail. But it's also one of the most effective because most stress comes from vague, undefined fear of what might happen. And when you actually imagine the specifics of the worst case, you realize it's survivable and your stress decreases dramatically. Seneca practiced this every night before bed. He would spend time imagining everything that could go wrong tomorrow. He would imagine losing his wealth, his status, his health. He would imagine being exiled or imprisoned or facing death. And the purpose wasn't to torture himself, but to mentally prepare himself so that if any of those things actually happened, he wouldn't be blindsided. He'd already processed the possibility and developed a response. And paradoxically, this practice made him less stressed, not more, because he'd removed the element of surprise and proven to himself that he could handle whatever came. Marcus Aurelius applied this to his role as emperor, where he had to make high-stakes decisions constantly. And before making any major decision, he would imagine all the ways it could fail, all the unintended consequences, all the people who would criticize him, and he would walk himself through how he would respond to each scenario with dignity and wisdom. And this mental rehearsal meant that when things did go wrong, which they inevitably did, he was prepared and could respond calmly instead of being overwhelmed by stress and panic. Here's why this works so effectively for stress reduction. Your brain generates stress when it perceives threat, and one of the biggest threats is uncertainty about whether you can handle what might happen. So when you deliberately imagine handling the worst case, you're proving to your nervous system that you're resourceful and resilient, and that proof reduces the threat assessment and therefore reduces the stress response. The key distinction that makes this healthy instead of catastrophizing is that you don't just imagine the worst case and stop there. You imagine the worst case, and then you imagine yourself coping, adapting, learning, growing, finding meaning, and moving forward. So you're building confidence in your ability to handle adversity rather than just scaring yourself. The practical technique is to spend 5 minutes every evening before bed doing this practice. You pick one thing that's causing you stress. Maybe it's a difficult conversation you need to have, a financial challenge, a health concern, a relationship issue, and you vividly imagine the worst realistic outcome. Not some catastrophic fantasy, but the actual worst that's likely to happen. And then you imagine yourself 6 months later having survived it, having learned from it, having adapted your life around it. And you notice that life continued, that you found other sources of meaning and joy, that you're okay even though the worst case happened. What this does over time is it drastically reduces anticipatory stress because you've mentally rehearsed handling the thing you're afraid of. So your brain no longer sees it as this terrifying unknown. It sees it as something challenging but manageable. And that reframe alone can reduce your stress levels by 30 to 40% because so much stress is about fear of the future rather than actual present danger. And this is exactly where the subconscious millionaire system becomes incredibly valuable. because what we're really doing with these Stoic techniques is reprogramming how your subconscious mind interprets and responds to stressful situations. And while these practices are powerful, they become exponentially more effective when you combine them with direct subconscious reprogramming that addresses the core beliefs creating your stress response in the first place. That system gives you specific protocols for identifying subconscious stress triggers, whether that's beliefs about not being safe, not being good enough, not being in control, or whatever patterns got installed during your formative years. And it shows you how to rewrite those programs so that your automatic response to challenges is calm confidence instead of stress and anxiety. So if you want to accelerate these results and make them permanent, definitely check out that link in the description. But let's keep going because the next technique is where this gets really transformative. The third Stoic meditation technique is actively meditating on the dichotomy of control. And this is fundamentally different from passive meditation, where you're just observing your thoughts. This is an active mental exercise where you systematically categorize everything causing you stress into two categories: things within your control and things outside your control. And then you practice releasing all attachment to the things outside your control while focusing your energy entirely on the things within your control. Epictetus considered this the foundation of all Stoic practice, and he taught that all stress and suffering comes from trying to control things that are outside your control or neglecting things that are within your control. And the moment you get these categories clear in your mind, stress decreases dramatically because you're no longer wasting energy fighting reality. Marcus Aurelius practiced this meditation daily. He would sit and go through everything on his mind, all his responsibilities, all his concerns, all his worries, and he would ask for each one. Is this within my control or outside my control? And for everything outside his control, he would practice saying some version of this is not mine to control. I release my attachment to this outcome. And for everything within his control, he would make a clear decision about what action to take. Here's the practical application that will transform your stress levels. Every morning, spend 10 minutes with a journal and write down everything that's causing you stress, everything you're worried about, everything that's weighing on your mind, and then go through the list and mark each item with a C for within your control or an N for not within your control. And what you'll discover is that probably 70 to 80% of your stress is about things that are completely outside your control. Things like other people's opinions, the economy, the past, the future, outcomes of your efforts, other people's choices, and you're burning massive amounts of mental and emotional energy trying to influence things that you fundamentally cannot control. The Stoic meditation practice is to look at each item marked with an N and practice a releasing statement. Something like, I cannot control this, therefore I will not carry stress about it. I will focus only on what I can control, which is my response. And you literally visualize putting that item down, setting it aside, releasing the grip you have on it. And what happens is you feel your nervous system relax because you've given yourself permission to stop carrying that particular burden. For the items marked with AC, you don't release them, you make a clear action plan, you decide exactly what you're going to do about them. And once you have a plan, the stress decreases because your brain is no longer in this anxious loop of worrying without direction. It knows what the next step is. Seneca writes that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And most stress is caused by your mind spinning in circles about problems without taking clear action or making clear decisions. So this meditation technique gives you a systematic process for breaking that cycle by separating what you can influence from what you can't and responding appropriately to each category. The transformative insight that comes from consistent practice of this technique is that you realize you actually have way more control than you thought, not over external circumstances, but over your internal response. And that internal control is where your real power lies, because two people can face the exact same external situation, and one experiences overwhelming stress while the other remains calm. And the difference is not the situation, it's how they're interpreting it and what they're trying to control. The fourth Stoic meditation technique is memento mori, the meditation on death. And while this might sound morbid, It's actually one of the most stress-reducing practices you can develop because it instantly puts all your daily stresses into proper perspective by reminding you that your time is finite and most of the things you're stressed about will be completely irrelevant when you're looking back from the end of your life. Marcus Aurelius meditated on death constantly, not because he was depressed or suicidal, but because contemplating mortality clarified what actually mattered and what was just noise, and that clarity eliminated huge amounts of unnecessary stress because he could see that most of the things people were stressed about, the social drama, the status games, the petty conflicts, were completely meaningless in the context of the brief time we have on this planet. The practice involves sitting quietly and imagining yourself at the very end of your life looking back, and from that vantage point, asking yourself, will the thing I'm stressed about right now matter at all? Will I even remember it? Will I wish I'd spent more energy worrying about it? Or will I wish I'd let it go and focused on what truly mattered, like relationships, experiences, growth, contribution, and living with integrity? Seneca practiced a version of this, where he would end each day by reviewing it as if it were his last day alive. And he would ask himself if he was proud of how he spent his time and energy, if he acted with virtue, if he treated people well, if he focused on what mattered. And this daily reflection kept him aligned with his values and dramatically reduced stress about trivial things because he was constantly checking whether his stress was proportionate to the actual significance of the situation in the context of his entire life. Here's the practical application. Set a timer for 3 minutes and sit in silence. Close your eyes and vividly imagine that you're 90 years old lying on your deathbed. Feel what that would be like, the weight of all those years, the perspective of having lived a full life. And from that perspective, think about the thing that's stressing you out right now, whether it's a work deadline, a social situation, a financial concern, a conflict with someone, and ask yourself honestly, from my deathbed, will this matter? Will I remember this stress? Will I wish I had worried more about it? Or will I see it as a tiny blip that I gave way too much power to? What happens through this practice is immediate and profound perspective shift. Things that felt like catastrophes suddenly feel manageable or even trivial. And your nervous system gets the message that this is not a life or death situation. It's just one of thousands of challenges you'll face in your lifetime, and you can handle it without generating unnecessary stress about it. Marcus Aurelius writes that death smiles at us all. All we can do is smile back. And what he means is that accepting the inevitability of death and the temporary nature of all things, including our stress and our problems, creates a kind of peace and freedom that's impossible to achieve if you're living as if you have unlimited time and everything matters equally. The goal of memento mori meditation is not to be depressed or pessimistic. It's to be radically honest about the finite nature of your existence so that you can prioritize what actually matters and release stress about things that won't matter when you look back from the end. And this practice, done consistently for just 3 minutes a day, can reduce your baseline stress by 40 to 50% because you're constantly recalibrating what deserves your emotional energy. The fifth and final Stoic meditation technique is a more fatty love of fate, which is the practice of not just accepting what happens, but actively embracing it as necessary and even perfect exactly as it is. And this might be the most advanced stress reduction technique because it requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to reality itself. But once you develop this capacity, stress essentially becomes optional because you're no longer fighting against what is, you're flowing with it. Marcus Aurelius practiced this by reminding himself that everything that happens is part of the natural order of the universe. It's fate unfolding, and his job is not to resist it or wish it were different, but to respond with virtue and wisdom regardless of circumstances. And this acceptance didn't make him passive or resigned. It made him incredibly effective because he wasn't wasting energy on resistance. He was directing all his energy toward appropriate response. Epictetus taught that we should want what happens rather than trying to make what we want happen. And this teaching is so counterintuitive to modern goal-oriented thinking that most people completely miss it. But what he's pointing to is that stress comes from the gap between your expectations and reality. And the moment you accept reality exactly as it is and work with it rather than against it, that gap disappears, and so does the stress. Here's how you practice a more fatty meditation. When something stressful happens, something that didn't go the way you wanted, something that feels like a setback or a problem, you stop and you take a few deep breaths, and then you say to yourself either out loud or internally, "This is exactly what needed to happen. This is perfect exactly as it is. I may not understand why right now, but I trust that this is part of my path." And then you ask yourself, what is this situation teaching me? How is this making me stronger? What opportunity is hidden in this challenge? And you actively look for reasons why this difficult thing might actually be exactly what you needed, even though it's not what you wanted. What happens through this practice is that you're training your brain to find meaning and opportunity in adversity instead of just seeing threat and problems. And that reframe dramatically reduces stress because you're not experiencing the situation as something happening to you. You're experiencing it as something happening for you. Seneca writes that difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body, and every challenge you face is actually an opportunity to develop resilience, wisdom, patience, creativity, whatever quality that situation demands from you. And if you see it that way, then there are no bad situations. There are only growth opportunities, and that perspective eliminates the emotional resistance that generates stress. Marcus Aurelius applied this even to his own suffering. When he was sick or in pain or dealing with betrayal, he would practice saying this too is part of being human. This is my fate, and I embrace it. And that acceptance didn't make the pain go away, but it removed the secondary layer of suffering that comes from wishing things were different, from asking why me, from feeling victimized by circumstances. The practical technique is to practice this meditation at the end of each day. You review everything that happened, especially the things that were difficult or stressful, and you practice finding reasons to be grateful for them, reasons why they might have been exactly what you needed. And over time, this practice rewires your automatic response to challenges from resistance and stress to acceptance and curiosity. And that single shift can transform your entire experience of life. So let's bring all 5 Stoic meditation techniques together into a complete stress reduction system that you can implement immediately. First, practice the view from above to gain cosmic perspective on your problems and reduce their emotional intensity. Second, use premeditatio malorum to mentally rehearse handling worst-case scenarios so they lose their power to generate anticipatory stress. Third, actively meditate on the dichotomy of control to separate what you can influence from what you can't and direct your energy appropriately. Fourth, practice memento mori to put everything in the context of your mortality so you can see what actually matters and release stress about trivial things. And fifth, cultivate amor fati to transform your relationship with difficulty from resistance to acceptance and even gratitude. These 5 techniques work together to address stress from every angle: perspective, preparation, focus, priority, and acceptance. And when you practice all 5 consistently, even just 10 minutes a day total, you will experience a dramatic reduction in your baseline stress levels within 1 week. And within 30 days, people will notice that you're responding to challenges completely differently, with calm and clarity instead of anxiety and reactivity. Now here's the critical distinction between people who watch this video and feel temporarily inspired versus people who actually transform their stress levels permanently. Implementation. And the challenge with implementation is that stress is not just caused by your conscious thoughts. It's generated by deep subconscious patterns and beliefs about safety, control, worthiness, and survival that got installed during childhood and reinforced over decades. This is exactly why the subconscious millionaire system that I've linked in the description is so essential for making this transformation permanent. Because that system gives you the specific tools for identifying and reprogramming the subconscious patterns that generate chronic stress at the root level. So instead of just managing stress symptoms with these meditation techniques, you're actually eliminating the internal causes that create stress in the first place. And when you combine these 5 Stoa practices with that deep subconscious reprogramming work, you create a complete transformation where stress genuinely stops being a dominant force in your life. The investment you make in that system will return to you exponentially in the form of better health, clearer thinking, improved relationships, and the capacity to actually enjoy your life instead of just surviving it in a constant state of low-level stress. So click that link right now, while you're thinking about it, and commit to doing the work that creates lasting change. And then subscribe to this channel if you want more ancient wisdom combined with modern psychology to help you build the mental and emotional resilience that most people never develop. Because these Stoic techniques have worked for 2,000 years, and they will work for you if you actually practice them starting today.